Welcome to the Nobel Peace Center and today's talk with Frances Haugen. This is made possible thanks to our partner Luminate. Together with Myrstad and Bente Kalsnes, we will debate if Facebook is undermining democracy and creating harm. We are live from our main hall. Those of you who are lucky to be with us in person are surrounded by this year's Peace Prize exhibition. And those of you who are joining us online can watch a digital version of it at our website. It is highly recommended. This exhibition exposes how journalists across the world are putting their lives on the line, fighting information manipulation and abuse of power in a world where truth, trust, and democracy are at stake. In December, we had the honor of having the Peace Prize laureates Dmitry Muratov and Maria Ressa on this very stage. And they opened the exhibition about themselves, really. Since then, the topic of the exhibition, unfortunately, has become even more relevant. Therefore, we have invited to Nobel Peace Talks, a series of events highlighting different perspectives of freedom of speech. You can see the entire program at our website. Yesterday, we in some way followed in the footsteps of Dmitry Muratov as we welcomed 3 brave Russian journalists to this very room. They shared with us how they continue their uphill battle to provide Russians with truthful coverage from the war in Ukraine. Today, we intend to heed the call from Maria Ressa, and I feel like we are under her watchful eye here, and namely to challenge the power of the tech giants. During her Nobel lecture, Maria Ressa said technology giants had allowed a virus of lies to infect each of us. She called for a massive global reform of the information ecosystem, which allows lies and hates to spread faster than facts. In her speech, she challenged everyone with a question: what are you willing to sacrifice for the truth? Therefore, it feels very relevant to have you here, Frances Haugen. You're a specialist in algorithmic product management and worked at Google, Pinterest, Yelp, and Facebook. During Frances Haugen's time at Facebook, she became increasingly alarmed by the choices the company makes, prioritizing their own profits over public safety and putting people's lives at risk. As a last resort and great personal risk, Haugen made a courageous decision to blow the whistle on Facebook. After an introduction from Ms. Haugen, she will be joined on stage by our moderator, Bente Kalsnes. Kalsnes is an associate professor at the Department of Communication at Christiania University College. Her research interests include how social media and other communication technologies impact politics, digital journalism, fake news, and disinformation. She has also published a book on fake news and received awards for her work. We're also very fortunate to have Finn Litsovholm Myrstad here today. He leads the development of better, more ethical digital policies and standards at the Norwegian Consumer Council. Myrstad is the EU chair of the Transatlantic Consumer Dialogue's InfoSoc Committee, which gathers 75 organizations from both sides of the Atlantic. He is also a member of the royally appointed Norwegian Privacy Commission. A big thank you to our partners Luminate, Reitan Retail, Hydro, and Fritt Ord for supporting this event series. But now, please welcome Frances Haugen to the stage. The floor is yours.
Thank you for getting chairs. I have a little bit of nerve damage in my legs, and we've had a very long 90 minutes. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. My name is Frances Haugen. It is a singular privilege to be with you here at the Peace Center today. Last year, I left my job at Facebook as I felt I could no longer be part of a system which harms children, stokes polarization, and weakens our democracies. I disclosed what I felt governments and the public should know about what is happening within these social media giants. The deliberate choices they make to maximize profit at the expense of public safety. The never-ending pursuit of growth at any cost. The care for family, the value of a healthy nation, were part of my upbringing. I grew up in a home where the kitchen was full of crocheted potholders made by my Norwegian great-grandmother, Benda Haugen, and with stories about what could be learned from Amundsen's explorations in the Arctic and Antarctic. One of the few stories I know about my great-grandfather was that one of his most treasured memories was that he was able to return to Norway, which he had left as a small boy, to play in the band at the coronation of Haakon VII and the establishment of a sovereign Norway. It is a great honor to follow in his footsteps and return to Oslo to provide testimony today about the need to protect Norway from a modern threat to Norwegian sovereignty, the Meta Corporation and their neglect of public safety, and the endangerment of speakers of non-English languages. It is clear that governments around the world have been searching for answers about how to tackle some of the biggest issues of the day, how to protect citizens and democracies. Civil society groups and journalists have been placing a critical role in documenting the numerous harms facilitated by social media. These issues of information, trust, and democracy are difficult, once-in-a-generation challenges that you're trying to solve. The biggest opportunity with European-wide regulation is mandatory transparency with access for researchers and civil society groups. Sunlight will be an important disinfectant for these toxic platforms. Self-regulation on social media has not worked. It will not work. Platforms cannot be trusted to act in the public interest. They are often, as my disclosures demonstrate over and over again, fully aware of the harms caused by their products and services, yet choose to ignore these in favor of growth and profit. The mandatory transparency measures that give researchers access to data from platforms in the Digital Services Act will be an important step towards accountability. Up until now, platforms and their profitable algorithms have remained inside a black box. Any democratic digital regulation needs to respect rights while getting to the heart of the business model of the platforms, addressing the algorithms and design features that enable the spread of disinformation and hate. As I wrote in the Financial Times last week, international civil society groups have spent years warning social media platforms and lawmakers of crises, often in real time. They have nowhere near the resources of big tech, yet most of the public's analysis of social media's harms is because of the massive evidence base that they have created. Without this, emerging regulation would be built on theories of harm as opposed to actual facts. Another early leader in sounding the alarm bell about how big tech harms rights and democracy was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize here in December, Maria Ressa. Her work represents the spirit of resistance of for those who claim their agency over the algorithm and the refusal to let a faceless corporation destabilize their democracy. While journalists and civil society groups play a critical role highlighting the harms of big tech in parliaments, parliaments have an important opportunity for democratic oversight. There is one lever of power that Norway has at its disposal that is unique: the Government Pension Fund of Norway. The pension fund owns 1.01% of the Meta Corporation. This gives the Norwegian state and citizens a unique opportunity to use this investment for good. The stated objective of the fund is to ensure responsible and long-term management of revenue from Norway's oil and gas resources. But as the disclosures I made demonstrated, Meta is not a responsible actor that can be trusted with our children, our personal data, or our democracies. Climate disinformation that proliferates on Facebook makes it harder for the world to agree on common solutions to climate change. During the pandemic, we saw the negative consequences of COVID conspiracies and vaccine hesitancy, which killed huge numbers of people. Eating disorders, anxiety, and bullying are all rampant in the news feeds of our children. If Meta were a normal company, the pension fund would hold 1% of voting rights at Meta's shareholder meetings. But because of the obscure nature of Facebook's share structure, this is not the case. This gives the fund limited options for shareholder activism or exerting influence commonly associated with such a stake in a company. When speaking in the Norwegian parliament yesterday, I formally called for the Government Pension Fund of Norway to divest its stock from Meta. I make this call not just for moral reasons, but also from a financial risk perspective. The current structure of Meta is one that is so obsessed with flat hierarchies and collective responsibility that the end result is no individual responsibility. While this does not bode well for investors, it certainly does not bode well for human rights, as we have seen in places like Myanmar, Ethiopia, and Ukraine. The company has consistently demonstrated that it puts profits before people while continuing to act with impunity. In the disclosures, it is patently clear that Facebook gives the most reach to the most divisive and polarizing content. And it's known this for years. And its advertising model allows cheaper ad rates for extremist parties. We can't have a democracy or safe societies when it is 5 to 10 times cheaper to run hateful or divisive ads than it is to run an empathetic or consensus-building ad. This represents a systematic risk for every one of the fund's investments. We cannot have investments without the rule of law. We can't have growth without stability, and Facebook undermines both. If the fund is to protect human rights and Norway's moral authority, reevaluating this investment is critical. There can be profitable investments that protect the environment, the well-being of children, and the safeguarding of democracy. I urge you to use your unique position of influence and moral authority in the world to do the right thing. I'm thrilled to be here today. Thank you for the invitation, and I look forward to our discussion.
Hello, my name is Bente Kalsnes, and I'm honored to be here today. As a researcher trying to do research on Facebook, that is fairly frustrating.
Yeah, I can imagine.
As you said, for us it's a black box, and getting access to the data has been really troubling. So,
well, I appreciate your persistence.
So your work has been important also for us, and it's going to be more important in the time ahead. But I wanted to dive into some of your findings from the leaks. We've heard about how Facebook is damaging mental health, fomenting ethnic violence, failing to curb misinformation. These are some of the findings from the leaks. But can you give us some concrete examples of the workings of Facebook, and why is this happening? What is about the mechanism of Facebook that makes these problems?
Yeah. So the thing I always like to remind people is that I am not saying social media is bad, and I'm not saying that the current way we solve problems is good. Let's roll back in time to 2008. Back in 2000, actually, more basic question, what is Facebook, right? Like when I ask people this question, like what is Facebook? People usually say, Facebook is a piece of software I use for connecting with my family and friends. And if we were to roll back time to 2008, that's what Facebook was. It was about a system where we were able to follow our friends, we got content from our friends. It was mostly about content we asked for. Facebook's own documents say you can think of all the content on Facebook that you see as falling into 2 buckets. Content you asked for, so that's your family, your friends, pages you intentionally followed, groups you intentionally joined, and content you did not ask for. So that's things like a group that you were invited to, which Facebook started putting content into your feed from, and because you wrote a comment saying this is misinformation, they were like, oh, you like it, and they gave you more of it. They considered it a follow. Or a post that one of your friends commented on, and now they were like, oh, because your friend is interested in this, we'll put it in your feed. Facebook has run experiments where they say, if we just give you more content you asked for, and less content that we put in your feed because an algorithm said you were more likely to engage with it, for free, this is content neutral, for free you get less hate speech, less violence, less nudity. Because the problem with social media is not people, it is not even content. It is a system of amplification and a system of product choices that gives the most reach to the most extreme ideas. And this happened because way back in 2008, this is how much you used Facebook. This is how much you consumed. And your family and friends did not comply with the desires of Facebook's shareholders. You know, every quarter, Facebook needed to demonstrate that you were consuming more, right? Because they only have a couple levers to drive growth. They can get more users, they can get you to consume more, or they can charge more. They can show you more ads, or they can charge more for those ads. They cannot show you any more ads than they currently do. It's like 1 in 7. they continue getting better with the algorithms and make the ads more expensive. But that getting you to look at more and more content, they had to figure out different ways. And those ways were making it easier for you to find yourself into groups, pushing you into very large groups. In many countries in Africa, the largest source of news in those countries is a mega Facebook group. 5 million people in a single Facebook group. Not a newspaper, not a thing that has humans involved, but a Facebook group. And the way a mega group works is every day there's 1,000 pieces of content generated in that group, 5,000 pieces of content. And Facebook has to pick out just a few of them to put in your feed because they don't want to overwhelm you. And when you have an algorithm that rewards content that has a fight in the comment feed, or that doesn't acknowledge that the fastest way to a click is anger, when you have an algorithm that doesn't take that human dimension into account, you end up in a situation where the algorithm of those 1,000 posts, it let the most angry ones race to the top. So that's how we got here today. It's not that social media is bad. It's not that people are bad. It's that a system that was designed for economic profit is giving the most reach to the most extreme ideas.
And this system has been called surveillance capitalism by the author Shoshana Zuboff and also by Maria Ressa in her Nobel speech. So how does this surveillance capitalism work? What is the content of that capitalism?
So people often say, when you don't pay for something, you may not be aware of it, but you are the product. So Facebook's business model is they don't charge their consumers to use Facebook. They give it away for free. But the thing that they collect from you is every time you engage with a post, every time you send a message to someone, every time you write a post, you are giving them more information about yourself. And they use that information to synthesize a virtual version of you to figure out what might you want to buy next. And Facebook is very, very good at connecting marketers based on all that information that you've provided them with opportunities to sell you things. And so surveillance capitalism takes the information that you produce by always watching you, always trying to extract more nuance, and then monetizing that by selling it to advertisers.
So we talk about the business model, and it's a business model based on personal data and engagement. And you've said many places in tweets and other places that Facebook is chronically underfunded and understaffs the team responsible for keeping us safe, especially in the most vulnerable places on the earth, like you talked about earlier today. Can you give us some concrete examples of that? What does it, how is it Facebook staffed in the US compared to other countries, like Ethiopia or?
So it's important for people to understand that Facebook over the course of the last 10 years has come to admit that the system of giving the most reach to the most extreme ideas, or Tide Pods, right? Tide Pods became a meme because it connected with some part of our minds, right? That there has to be, if we are going to continue to run these algorithms where it filters out a small number of things and gives them this huge runway, that they need to watch it. They need to be able to pluck off those things that are actually hurting people, because kids got hospitalized and kids died from the Tide Pod thing, right? It sounds innocuous until people really get hurt. But Facebook didn't allocate that budget evenly. It's very important for people to understand how big the economic difference is between what they monetize in the United States. So it's some number I think $55 per person. I'm not sure if this is per quarter or per year. I know the stat came out a month ago. It's $55 for the United States. It's $14.50 for Europe. It's $4.50 for Asia. And it's $2.50 for the rest of the world combined, right? And so you have a situation where when Facebook looks at, okay, we're going to pay for third-party fact-checking, if you'll notice, they do not list how many third-party fact checks go to each country, how many third-party fact checks go to each language. But they do. I've actually done this exercise. I've hired people who speak languages that I don't speak to see how Facebook describes the third-party fact-checking program in places that they don't support. And Facebook will publicly make statements like, we are committed to having an international global fact-checking program with over 80 international partners, ignoring the fact that in that language, there's no one covering it. And Facebook uses this, being able to operate behind a curtain to hide the fact that in 2020, which is the year I had the data for, 87% of the operational budget, 87% of the operational budget for misinformation went to English, even though only about 9% of users spoke English. And the reason they did this is Facebook is an American corporation, and if they treated American users the way they treat the rest of the world, or way they treat people who speak languages that have 5 million, 10 million speakers, they would immediately get regulated in the United States. And so Facebook consistently allocates attention for safety, not based on actual severity, but based on the chance that there will be PR blowback.
So we know that there's strict laws in Germany, and they pay more attention to German content because of that.
Yep.
So if we in Norway said that we need 1,000 moderators, because we need to have moderators that understand the language, and we can argue that Facebook is an important part of the public sphere.
Sure.
Lots of debates are happening there. We need to have more people to moderate that, and we want to have transparency.
Yeah.
Would that be realistic?
And I would love if you guys passed a law like that, just for the theater of it all. Because remember, when we resist oppressive powers, theater is actually very important. Like the performativity of resistance is important, right? If you guys can get out of Facebook how many moderators speak Norwegian, I will be so proud of you. Because the French have been trying to do this for years and have gone nowhere, right? Like the disrespect for non-English languages is just huge. And the reason they don't tell you how many moderators there are is because the number is probably shockingly small in Norwegian. So I would encourage you to pass that law. I would love to see what would happen, just because sometimes the thing you do for a bully is you just be annoying, right? Be the sand in the gears.
And you talked about how this business model is based on engagement. Let's say if this business model was based on education. How would the algorithm look like?
Yeah. Actually, this is a great, let's actually just take a step back. Let's unpack that a little bit more, which is when we say the business model is based on engagement, we need to actually unwind that a little bit. So a pivotal point in my disclosures is 2018. So up until 2018, the goal of the newsfeed was, so remember, all algorithms are not intelligent. We use the phrase artificial intelligence as a misnomer. People who study these things just call it machine learning, right? Because these algorithms they don't have context, they're not making choices, they're just little optimization engines. The optimization function for the newsfeed prior to 2018 was time spent. Could they keep you on the site longer? In 2018, they made a shift to focusing on engagement. And the reason they did that, the reason we say the business model is based on engagement, is when we think about Facebook, we mostly think about it as our perspective as consumers. But Facebook is actually a two-sided marketplace. There are producers who make content, and there are consumers who consume content. Facebook had a problem in 2018, which was over time, people were producing less and less content. Remember how I said your friends let Facebook down? It's the same thing, right? Like Facebook, if people don't produce content, people don't get to consume content. And people were slowly making less and less content. And Facebook ran a bunch of experiments on producers, i.e. you, and found that if they artificially gave you more distribution, which meant that you got more likes, more comments, more reshares, the more little hits of dopamine you got, i.e. more likes, more comments, more reshares, the more content you produced. Right? I literally figured out what incentives can we, dangle in front of you to get you to feed the beast. And so they switched from optimizing just for like content that will keep you there, keep you consuming, to content that will make you a tool in their machine by producing engagement that will make the producers continue to produce. So let's take a step back. So instead of using you for incentivizing the producers, and the problem with that system is the content that gets the most engagement is disproportionately polarizing content, right? Because content that makes us fight, like if I give you something that's nuanced, that's complex, like truth is not often satisfying, right? We have to sit with it. We have to come to peace with it. While misinformation is like French fries. It can explore the entire space of lies and find the thing that speaks to you, the thing that draws you in. It's an unfair fight when it comes to engagement. If we optimized for your well-being or societal well-being with education, we would want to come in there and say, hey, and actually the Integrity Institute did a really good paper on this in the last week or two. They said, what if we had a measure of page quality or of like producer quality? So Google does this. Like the reason Google is here and not Alta Vista, which was the big full text search engine before Google, was Google focused on, can we find a way of computing page quality? And they invented a thing called PageRank, right? They looked at the network of interactions and they said, this is the quality of individual pages. And it was just like night and day. Like I remember the pleasure of Google in 1996, right? Because like my mother's an academic and she showed, or like even 95, like I saw like a real early version of Google. She's like, watch this magic. And what the people at the Integrity Institute have been saying, if we actually computed a value of page quality, because a whole bunch of producers on Facebook right now are trolls. They're people who have synthetically built pages. You know, when you look in the United States, the MIT Tech Review did a really good piece that was based on some disclosures from Facebook that said in 2019, of the top 15 evangelical Christian pages in the United States, like evangelical Christian interests, 13 of the 15 were from trolls. They were very clearly not American Christians. You know, they're from Macedonia, they're from other places in the world. If you looked at the data, they were not real. If you looked at it for African American interest pages, 9 of the top 15. Native Americans, it was like 6 of the top 15. If Facebook came in there and said, we have a bunch of measures of someone who has made a synthetic page, right? We can sit and have a little tech talk if you want to learn more. We have measures of like what is a page that is virality hacking, right? That is not real. If we put in that ranking, suddenly the misinformation plummets. And what's cool about that is we don't need language, we don't need content. We don't need to pick which ideas are good or bad to put rankings of quality based on we can watch the signals that you're manipulating the system. And Facebook doesn't want to come in there and rock the boat because the reality is some people have invested a lot in manipulating the system and Facebook is scared to upset those people.
So what can be done when it comes to how this works and how it can be changed within Facebook?
I think so. The DSA is getting very close to passing, and I think it is going to completely change the conversation. Because the way we have gotten to where we are today is that Facebook is operated behind a curtain, right? Facebook knows that no one can see what happens inside the company, no one can see what's going on. To give you an indication what's going to change, right? Facebook has been putting out since 2021 something called the Most Viewed Content Report. And I love this report. I love this report. Like if I had a little bit more free time, I really want to start a YouTube channel where I discuss the Facebook Transparency Center as like a work of art, right? It's like, what is this piece trying to say? Like, how is it trying to say this, right? Because this thing is so deceptive, right? So they show you just 20 posts, right? 20 posts, because the very top, they manicure it. They can go in there and make sure it gets scrubbed, show you top 20 posts, top 20 pages, and only in the United States. And only in the United States. And that is the most dangerous and deceptive thing about this report. Because like we said before, they invest in misinformation in the United States, but not abroad. And if we saw what this looked like, the same report looked like in the most fragile places in the world, we would be horrified. Because it's all graphic violence. It's all pandering to ethnic stereotypes, accusing your rivals of doing horrible things to children. And so once we have transparency, we can begin demanding action. And I really believe we need to be protesting. We need to be putting pressure on these systems. We need to be divesting. Because we cannot, just alone, things like ads, right? Like, until we have flat ad rates for political ads, we will continue to subsidize extremist parties at the expense of the center. And we cannot have we can't have democracies if we subsidize division over consensus and reconciliation.
We're going to dive more into these topics, but now I'm going to ask Finn to come on stage. Finn, Facebook has been around for about 20 years, and in all that time they have not been able to tackle questions of public safety and accountability effectively. You have been working on issues like this for a long time through your work at the Norwegian Consumer Council and as your role as the chair of the transatlantic network of 75 consumer rights organizations. And you and your team have exposed tech giants' privacy violations, manipulation design, and security vulnerabilities, and advocated for government regulations. Can you talk a bit about your work with all the tech companies and what you've been focusing on when it comes to these issues?
Yeah, I mean, so we're really dependent on disclosures such as Frances Haugen's. I mean, because it's a black box for us as well. So what we've been trying to do is to document the harms or document the practices. So we can do that through working with hackers to intercept data flows to see what data is collected from the apps that we use. Where does it go? Where does it end up? And we did one piece of research where we intercepted the data from 10 popular apps. And we saw, okay, what data is collected? These were not Facebook apps because we can't access those, right? We tried, but we can't. And what we found was from those 10 popular apps that were popular in Norway, but also around the world, was that data, personal data, really sensitive data, such as where you lived, who you're in contact with, all these things, were shared with 135 different third parties. And that was just what we could observe from 10 apps. And Google and Facebook were integrated in a majority of those apps. And if you compare that with research done by others, we know that Google and Facebook are integrated to a majority of the apps in the world. I think a study from the Australian Competition and Consumer Authority showed that Google was integrated into 80% of the apps and Facebook 40% of the apps. And we also know they're integrated to most of the websites in the world. So it's not only the data that we give away through our likes and shares, but it's also data collected from our phones. I mean, all the Google apps and Facebook apps are super invasive just by having them on your phone. And then they get all the data that they collect from all the websites and all the apps. And then they also can get at least additional source of information from other places. So what we're ended up with is that Facebook and Google, who are the tip of the iceberg here, are getting enormous amounts of information about us. And then they can compare it with other people. So if you take me as an example, they can create a profile on me. We call it a digital twin, right? And then they can compare it to all the people that look like me in the world, that have similar interests to me, similar age, similar life situation, etc. And then they can see, okay, all these people have been doing these things. So it's probably quite likely that Finn is going to do the same things. We're going to put an ad in front of him to trigger a buy, a purchase or something. So let's say a lot of people like me have a gambling problem. And they see, okay, Finn here, or they don't know my name, they don't need to know my name, but this user, XYZ, is very similar to all the other users who are gambling a lot and spending a lot of money. Let's put an offer in front of him that he cannot refuse. And then they will lure me into this. And we have lots of examples of how our vulnerabilities are being exposed by this, what we call profiling, and how you can then target ads, micro-target ads, whether it's by using political messages or whether it is to make you trigger, habits like, gambling or eating disorders. Or it could also be used to discriminate you. And we have lots of examples of that, of how you can be given a risk score, for example. And that could be based on a lot of things. It doesn't need to be true, but the algorithm or the machine learning thinks that you are a risk category. And therefore, you're not shown housing ads or ads for jobs. So you're being discriminated against based on your digital profile. And you have no way of checking your digital profile, and you have no way of knowing if you're even being discriminated. So this is a huge problem, I think, that we really need to address. So I really welcome the disclosures, and we need much more of that, right? We need to force the companies, just like Frances suggests, force them to be transparent so we can make informed policy decisions on how to attack this. And clearly, I think this is a business model issue as well, as Frances mentioned. And as long as the business model is to keep us engaged on the platform, to show us as much ads as possible, we have a huge problem. So I think definitely welcome all the proposals that Frances has come up with.
So we know there's lots of discussion about these topics in the EU. There's a proposal for a new law, Digital Service Act and Digital Market Act. So what are the most promising initiatives that you see, Finn, when it comes to regulating these companies?
Yeah, so thanks to disclosures by Frances and other whistleblowers, and because of also all the scandals that we've had, Cambridge Analytica is a huge scandal, but there's been lots of others, and you mentioned Myanmar, and so it's become really clear that we need to do something, right? And we've had 10, 15 years or 20 years where the companies have basically been saying, we're here for good, trust us, let us do what we don't kill innovation, blah, blah, blah. And I think we need to look at this as any other industry in the past that needed to be regulated, whether it was big tobacco, whether it was the car industry. We didn't have car belts mandated car belts in the past, and it led to many road deaths. And in the beginning, the car industry said, no, we don't need mandated seat belts because it's part of our freedom to choose whether you want a seat belt or not, right?
And a really important distinction here is that for oil companies, for tobacco, for cars, we could independently ask questions, right? So with tobacco, tobacco came out and said, we understand cancer is a problem, but we have invented filtered cigarettes, and now you're fine. And because we could independently verify, we could say, actually, we ran all these experiments. It makes you breathe deeper because you're more comfortable. It actually causes more cancer. And the problem with these platforms is we don't get to ask questions unless they consent, and they give us selective information.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. So there are a lot of really good initiatives now coming, both in the US, there's huge, it seems to me anyway, that there are lots of discussions that we just didn't have 5 years ago, and that's really great. The European Union is doing a lot, and she mentioned one initiative, and there was another one passed last week, which is aimed at increasing competition, right? So that's a real problem, that even if as a consumer would like to use another service, you can't, either because there is no other service to go to, or you're locked in because all your friends are this service, or because you can't actually move your data to another service, for example. So there's a proposal now aimed at breaking that up a bit, and will give also the European Union more powers to sort of clamp down on anti-competitive behavior, and I think that's really good. And then there's one proposal as well, which I would like to draw attention to, which is being discussed currently. And I'd like to take a step back, because in the 80s, we had a big problem with hole in the ozone layer, right? And that was a huge problem, and we're having huge discussions about it. And one of the problems with that was one of the gases that was really bad for the ozone layer was CFC gases, KFK-gaser, right? And they were used in cooling down our food, in refrigerators, etc. And the industry said, we cannot ban these CFC gases, we'll have a food crisis on our hands. And it was basically trying to say, we can't regulate this. But lo and behold, in 1990, there was a Montreal Protocol that banned the use of CFC gases to improve the environment. And lo and behold, I think we still have refrigerators. The industry actually innovated when they were forced to, right? They were forced to innovate because we said this practice is actually not sustainable. So I think we also need to make some fundamental changes to how the business model works. So one proposal, and again, this is not going to fix everything, right? This is not a silver bullet. There's no one silver bullet. You have to have a series of proposals. But I think if we can take some of the data away from the equation, because the data that I just described is used to micro-target messages to us. If you can take some of that data away from the market, it will be harder to do that micro-targeting. And also you'll avoid a lot of these, secondary effects of data use. Because we know that this data can be resold. The NATO went out last year and warned about this data collection because it's a threat to national security. And we see from the consumer side all these sort of possibilities for companies to manipulate and discriminate, right? So if we take the data out of the equation, we could probably also deal with some of the other problems that we have. It won't solve all the problems. So we are calling for a ban on what we call surveillance-based advertising. And that would say, so that would basically mean you cannot see advertisement based on massive surveillance. We think that would be a great plus for moving this discussion forward, and it would take away the incentive of collecting and sharing so much data. That does not mean that we will not give away data for getting a better service, but it cannot be used for advertising. So we think that could be a step in the right direction, and also we know there are alternatives to this, right? So yesterday we met with a company, a Norwegian company actually, that provides contextual advertising. So that would be advertising based on the content that you see, and it's pretty modern these days. And they struggle to compete because this other business model, the ad-driven surveillance model, is so massive. And that doesn't need any personal data to exist. And also we could imagine that we could self-preference data, right? I could say, I want to see ads about football, arts, and culture. And I will see ads. And I tell the company that. So I think we have alternative business model for an ad-funded internet, which of course is important still today, I think, and going forward too.
We are soon going to open up for questions among the audience, so make sure to prepare some questions. Since we are based here in Oslo, in Norway right now, I want to ask you a little bit more about your idea and your proposal for the Norwegian pension fund to de-invest from Facebook stocks. Can you explain a little bit more why is that necessarily, and how can that contribute to this discussion?
So we need to think about what are all the levers that we can change the incentives that Facebook operates under. So just like we talked about with the advertising model, if we allow surveillance ads to run amok, they're more effective than contextual ads. And so contextual ads don't get to compete, even though we might prefer them, right? Similarly, Facebook has a number of things it relies on in order to continue to operate. One of the things that people have talked about with Microsoft is the thing that made Microsoft finally look in the mirror and be like, we have to make some different choices about how we run our company. Because I think if we all roll back in time to like early 2000s, late 1999, we felt pretty similar to Microsoft that we feel about Facebook right now. We felt like they controlled us in ways that we couldn't opt out of because of network effects. Right, like try to live without a Word document in 1999, right? And what happened was more and more young people refused to work at Microsoft. One of the core things that allows Facebook to continue to attract employees is their stock price, right? The stock, like money in Silicon Valley drives where people go. And as the stock declines, it forces them to look in the mirror because we deny resources to them to continue to be able to operate the way they are. We have to make the costs of changing, or the costs of not changing, we have to make the costs of staying the same as high as possible to make changing look attractive. Because the reality is people don't change when we shame them. They change when the costs of changing are less than the cost of staying the same. And so divestment, I think, is a really important move because, like, right now, Facebook is not just harming children, which is our future. They're not just harming our democracies. When you prioritize extremism over the center, it puts at risk every other investment in the portfolio, right? It's a systemic risk applied across all those investments. And so I think there's an opportunity here where the pension fund doesn't have to just say, we invest or we don't. They can put them on like the yellow list. They can say, here's the ways in which you need to change to get off the yellow list. And I think putting that pressure in there and being visible, given we can't use the standard mechanisms of corporate governance, because Mark Zuckerberg holds 56% of all the votes. Right, he is the king. He is the king of our information environment, the unilateral authority, the chairman of the board and the CEO. He is the full control. Because of that unilateral situation, we have to figure out ways to put pressure on them, and I think divestment can be one of those ways.
It's going to be interesting to see what is happening after this your visit here. And I also have to say something that we experienced while organizing this event.
Ooh, okay, this is great.
News.
Yeah.
There was an advertisement for this event posted on Facebook, and it was taken down internationally.
It was a political ad.
It was a political ad, and according to Facebook, it was not allowed to have a political ad from the Nobel Peace Prize Center. So,
but other events that very clearly are political that they've held have not been taken down.
What are your comments to this? What does it tell us?
This is,
It means we're doing something right, Peel.
no, and I think I mean, and for sure Frances can elaborate on that, but this is a huge problem, right? Because this is not the first time I've heard about this. I receive multiple messages about this from people who experience their content just taken down for no good reason. They don't get an explanation, they don't get a way to appeal, there's no one to contact. And if they ever reach someone to contact, it's going to be too late, right? So it was like the literature house in Fredrikstad, town here in Norway, that everyone in the audience know really well. Their content was taken down a few years ago. And had no, like the whole website, the whole Facebook page was like, which was their way to communicate to the public, was just taken down. So they could not organize events, they could not do anything. And that was because someone had reported a copyright violation.
Oh.
So they had posted a picture that someone meant was infringing on the copyright. But that was, first of all, a very narrow issue, and the whole page was taken down. But they couldn't reach the Facebook, they couldn't do anything. And so basically, their business was shut down for over a week. And it was only when the media started writing about the story that suddenly Facebook fixed this issue. We had an event which had a Facebook logo on it. Like this is 5-6 years ago, where we're going to discuss the awful terms and conditions that we have to accept when we click yes on terms and conditions. That was taken down. Immediately, never explained. So people have no right for redress, no way of complaining, and it's so slow.
So now we've been talking a lot about these problems and how to regulate them, but at the same time, Facebook is also a very important arena for free speech, public debates. In Norway, lots of the debate has moved from online newspapers to Facebook. So how is, we just talked about an example of how they are moderating. So what are your thoughts on how Facebook is moderating and kind of creating the limits of what is allowed to say and not to say, what to say on Facebook?
So this is part of what frustrates me so much, which is if I were to go survey knowledgeable people who are paying attention to the conversation on like, what should we do about Facebook? Most of them would say the conversation is about free speech versus moderation, or free speech versus censorship. And this framing is very intentional, right? Facebook has internal research on how when your content gets taken out, it drives you crazy, right? Or it hurts you, right? Facebook also has a large depth of literature on non-content-based solutions on how to keep you safe. Remember how I said at the very beginning, there's kind of two pools of content. There's like content you asked for and content you didn't ask for. Facebook knows that there's a variety of interventions that are about their algorithms that are not about content, or it's things like that quality score, like is this page manipulating virality, or things like friction, right? Friction sounds bad. We try to decrease friction, but another word for friction is discretion, right, or judgment. Right? Imagine, so Twitter does this. Imagine you had to click on a link before you reshared it. Have you been censored? I mean, you can still reshare it. You just have to click on it. Or like, what if you had to click on it and wait 30 seconds? Maybe actually read the first paragraph. What's crazy about that is lots and lots of social science research has shown that if you give people even a little pause, think about thinking fast versus thinking slow. If you give people even a little pause, they spread less misinformation and they're more critical. And Facebook knows this. They've run these experiments. You require clicking on a link, you're going to get 10, 15% less misinformation straight up for free. And guess what? It works in every language in the world. Doesn't matter how few speakers you have. It's a linguistic equity solution. Or, for example, let's say someone writes something. So Alice writes something. Bob reshares it, her friend. Carol reshares it, her friend to friend. Lands in Dan's newsfeed. So now we're 2 hops away from Alice. If Dan has to copy and paste that post to reshare it, so he can say anything he wants. It can be the most extreme idea, it can be offensive, whatever. He can say whatever he wants, but he has to copy and paste it, he has to make a choice. He has to have a human in the loop, not an instinct. That alone has the same impact on misinformation as the entire third-party fact-checking system. So when Mark Zuckerberg gets up in public and gives you a heartfelt thing on a podcast about how the last 5 years has been really important for him because he's learned that he's accepted he's unpopular because he's standing for what he believes in. He is a bastion of freedom of speech. I want to ask you, what protects freedom of speech better? cutting a research chain at 2 and asking a human to make a choice and copy and paste, or selectively choosing which ideas in English and not in other languages are dangerous, right? So we need to go in there and have transparency in how these systems work. We need transparency into their research. We need transparency into what are the levers we even get to discuss the set points on. Because if we were talking about an oil company, we would have an ability to independently verify the soil, the air, the water. We'd be able to go in there and have a mechanical engineer say, this oil derrick is working to standard or not to standard. We would get to have these conversations. Independent people would get to look at it, and we don't have that with Facebook today.
Okay, well, I'll very soon open up for questions, but one question for you, Finn, before we'll go to the room. We often talk about tech companies as if they were the same, but do you see some differences among the tech companies and how they try to protect public spaces, or how to try to facilitate for democratic discussions?
I mean, I think probably that's a question that Frances could answer better than me, having worked in many of these companies. So for me, it's just from the outside, right? So, and we don't work that much on misinformation and hate speech. So, but from my point of view, from the sort of what I talked about, you know, discriminatory ads, getting access to why am I seeing this ad kind of thing. So if you go on a Google ad or a Facebook ad today, right? Let's say you get an ad for something very specific to your, let's say you are interested in certain types of animals and you've been to this place and you get an ad for very specific, something very specific. You can click at, why am I seeing this ad, right? And you generally get a very generic answer. Oh, we want to reach you because you're between 20 and 50 and live in the Oslo region. And that is not the case. The advertiser who decided to put that ad in front of you wanted to reach people with that very specific interest in that very specific range. And I've met with Google, I've met with Facebook, in Silicon Valley, at their headquarters in Dublin, and in Oslo, and brought up this issue. Nothing happens. Like say Facebook, we filed a complaint against Facebook in 2010, saying that they were sharing way too much data with third-party apps. Fast forward to 2019, where the Cambridge Analytica scandal happened. That was the same issue that was exploited then. So my impression is that these companies are not willing to listen, at least not to people like us. Not maybe, I mean, but there are, of course, nuances and differences between the companies. I'm sure Frances can tell a bit more about that. But from my point of view, who've been working on this for a long time, I see very little willingness to change. And this is why I really think we need to moderate. And I think the business model, at least for Google, who also operates YouTube, and Facebook, who also operates Instagram, is a core problem here. Their incentive is so strong to keep us engaged and so strong to sell us ads. And that's why I think, so on the whole, I would say they're quite similar. But then, of course, there are differences. If you look at Amazon, also super data intensive, where you have other problems as well. Similar but different. Yeah.
Can I get it? Yeah. There are meaningful differences on the organic content side. And some of these, I don't want to give virtue to any of the companies, because I think sometimes doing the right thing happens out of necessity. Twitter has a public API, right? If you want to see about 10% of the public tweets, anyone in the world can get access to those and analyze them. If you want all the public tweets, you can pay them and they'll give you all those. And because they are willing to, open up the curtain at least a little bit, a huge fraction of the influence operations on Facebook are caught using Twitter's data. And I think part of the reason why Twitter has accepted some of these solutions, like you need to click on a link, is because they know people are watching. That there's radically more researchers on Twitter than there are on Facebook, because people can actually look at Twitter. And that means that there ends up being more pressure on Twitter to do the right thing. Things like Google, you can download Google search results. Personalization is still a similar problem, but overall we can see how the algorithm works. And people write papers where they download lots of the search results and they say, this is what's getting a voice and not getting a voice. All of that isn't happening on Facebook. So there are meaningful differences in these governance issues, but at the same time, none of these companies are going to act adequately unless there's transparency and accountability.
Good. Okay, so let's open up the room for questions. We have microphone. I saw one hand back here. I see She has
I can start with a question from the stream while
Okay.
you give the microphone to the audience, Scott. A viewer from the stream, Jan Jørgen Skartveit, asks, to what extent are Facebook or Meta investing money in educational platforms that in a digital school is replacing textbooks edited by publishers, and what kind of problem does this represent for teachers?
I don't know a lot on this topic. I've heard that Google is getting more involved in like digital literacy efforts in Europe, but I don't have a lot of context on that.
So I could briefly answer that question. So I sit in Personvernkommisjonen, which is a government-mandated expert body. We're writing a white paper right now for Norway and what we can do about privacy. And we're looking at schools, right? And what we see is that Google Education is integrated into approximately 30% of all schools in Norway. And the other actors are Microsoft and Apple. And this has happened without any public debate, really. I mean, public debate there has been, but not a political debate. Is this the way we want to do this? And I, at least, looking at Google, would question their motives for doing this.
Yeah.
I have friends working in Google who are working on, for example, these things, and they're great. And it's not, evil intention from those people.
Yeah.
But when the business model of Google is to monetize our data for ads, we have to ask ourselves some serious questions. Why are they going into schools? You're basically training our students to become Google consumers. That's what I say. That would be my, and this we should at least have a discussion about. So I think the government white paper will at least look into that quite seriously. And I think we need a public debate about how we do this and why we're doing it and what do we get back from it and what are the negative effects of doing this and could we have alternatives?
Mm-hmm. I saw several questions in the back. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Tobias Dahl. I come from SINTEF. It's a research institute similar to SRI in California. I had questions with regard to the processes in Congress in the US. There's this KIDS Act that's been discussed, which has bipartisan support and would regulate some of the use of social media with children. Now, I don't know the US kind of congressional climate as well as you might do, but do you see this thing actually passing into law, or do you see it being watered down by interests in industry? Do you see this kind of regulations actually, I mean, that would make a change in the US and here. Can you give us an opinion on whether you see that actually happening or what the likelihoods are?
So I think there's some good signs about that law. So when it is bipartisan, I think kids is an area that we can get more consensus on in the United States, and specifically like under 16s, which is I think what the law focuses on. In the US, we have a relatively, I said before, there's a reason why we think the debate is just about censorship, and it's because Facebook's PR team has done a really, really good job of pushing that that's the argument. I mean, you look at the oversight board, and the oversight board only has domain on censorship decisions. None of these product choices, none of these algorithm things. So in the United States, the levers that we generally think about with regulation are privacy, data ownership, and like freedom of speech. And in this case, a lot of the things in that provision of that law are privacy related. And like Finn said, removing data from the system has advantages. And I think particularly for kids, I don't know if people are aware of this, one of the things that's been feeding things like eating disorders is, you have a kid who's already, going through a change in their life, and they literally get, diet lollipop ads over and over again. Even if you're trying to step away, one thing I actually worry about contextual ads is these AI systems are very, very smart at drawing inferences. And even if you remove a lot of the cues about personal profiling, you might still have a situation where a kid gets shown contextual ads that, because the algorithm learns, oh, you are looking at recipes for food, we can show you diet ads, right? So I do worry that we're not going to necessarily solve the full problem, but extending privileges to 16-year-olds I think is a good first step. The larger problem is we are struggling to pass laws in general in the United States, right? Not all of us get new constitutions, people. Be kind. When I was visiting Berlin, they showed me the Berlin Constitution on this glass wall, and I felt this pang of jealousy because I was like, oh, a constitution that's only 30 years old. Amazing. But yeah, so every Congress we've been passing fewer and fewer laws. Literally, it's like a line for the last 20 years. So there's a different question, which is will we be able to pass it at all? And I don't know. I'm optimistic. I think there's more space in the United States probably for litigation. And litigation is going to be where the ball really moves down the field. And speaking of tobacco, that's how we dealt with tobacco in the United States. We didn't deal with it at a federal level. The state attorney generals came in and said, hey, like this is violating consumer rights. So, fingers crossed.
Another question here.
Hi, my name is Tobias Mahler. I'm a law professor at the University of Oslo, and thanks for a very interesting talk. You mentioned the Digital Services Act in the EU as a game changer. So I was wondering whether you could mention some of the parts that you think would really have an effect there, and also perhaps if you think there is something missing from that discussion in the EU.
So, like I said before, like right now, like we think we each are restricted to this little slice view of what is social media. And one of the things that I think is really dangerous about this system is that the people who generally regulate the system have a safer environment on Facebook than the people who are being harmed, right? So if your friends, went to university, if your friends are people who read the news and are thoughtful discussers of the news, you will look at your Facebook feed and see a cleaner, more sanitized version than someone who is socially isolated. The thing about social media is the harms are concentrated. You can't look at averages. In the United States, 80% of the COVID misinformation went to 4% of the people. 4% of the people. And the consequence of having that concentration was in the United States, people showed up at teachers' houses giving them death threats. Because these people were in these echo chambers where literally they were being told over and over again, your child's teacher is killing them. They're like, the children are going to commit suicide because they're forced to wear masks. Right? And if you hear, humans are social creatures. If you hear these messages over and over and over again, and remember, what's getting rewarded? Things that get engagement, things that trigger you. You end up having a few people in society being very, very disruptive because they're living in a non-consensus reality. So the thing that's going to change when we get that transparency is we can actually go in there and for the first time verify those things ourselves. Like with children, the median child is not harmed that much by social media. 20% of children are really deeply harmed. And we can't see those patterns today because we see only our little slices. And so the conversation will completely change once we have academic access and civil society access.
Yeah, Finn, do you want to jump in and talk a bit more about the DSA?
Yeah. So just great points. And just to add to that, I think this new law from the EU, the DSA, also it's negotiated as we speak this week. I think there was negotiations yesterday. So it's like we don't really know what will come out of it on certain issues. But there are 2 points in addition to what Frances mentioned. There is actually a discussion because the European Parliament passed their position where we saw that they want a ban on this sort of advertising for children. So that's good news. And the use of sensitive data. So that's data about your political position, it could be your sexual orientation, these things. Combined, those 2 things are very good. I would have obviously liked, if you think this is harmful to children, it's probably harmful to other vulnerable situations as well. So I would have obviously liked this ban to be wider. And also it could be hard to establish who's a child and who's not, but okay, it's at least a first step. So I think if we manage to keep that position in the negotiations, I think that would be a win. And then the second thing that's also proposed, hopefully not watered out, is a ban on what we call dark patterns.
Yeah, this is a good one.
Yeah, and these are basically manipulative techniques that companies use to make us say yes to things, right? The design, you click a button, and suddenly you've given away your whole photo library and all your location, contacts your friends, etc. These are extremely common ways that big tech companies use to manipulate us. And we have a case now pending against Google on this. Sadly filed 3 years ago and still not resolved in the Irish Data Protection Authority, which is where Google is headquartered in Europe, big problem. And we have a case pending against Amazon on using dark patterns. And I think, it's been clear that if it takes this long to enforce, right, maybe we need some actual bans. So I hope in the DSA we'll have a form of a ban at least on dark patterns. But this will still need to be further tweaked in more regulation, I think, as well.
One way to think about dark patterns, so it sounds like, okay, you're like making me actively check a box. Like, that's not that exciting. I think we need to start talking about dignity and autonomy, right? We don't think a lot about the idea of these systems, because they control information, are about power dynamics, right? When you have systems that can manipulate you, so like we talked about before, those people who are showing up and giving death threats to teachers, that person is a victim. right? They got pulled into a rabbit hole, they got a distorted picture of reality, and they didn't get to consent to it, right? The people who get exposed to the most misinformation on Facebook, the top 3 risk criteria are you are recently widowed, recently divorced, or you moved to a new city, right? These are people who are vulnerable and they're turning to social media as a surrogate for social connection. We could be dealing with a system that said, I'm going to actively take actions and demonstrate to you, I value your dignity and your autonomy. I'm not going to manipulate you with dark patterns. I'm going to make you actively consent. Or, I see you are doom scrolling to 2 a.m. Would you like me to slow down the app a little for you so it's just less pleasurable, right? Like they do this for hackers, right? If you're doing naughty things on Facebook, they'll slowly slow Facebook down. So it's like harder and harder for you to do things. But they won't do it for a vulnerable person who wants to go to bed, right? So we need to start asking, what are they actively doing to respect dignity and autonomy? And this is a first step. The DSA is a first step.
Okay, we got a question from the stream.
More questions? Finn, how have you exposed the harms caused by tech giants so far? You mentioned some, and how have you dealt with it? And can you leave us on a positive note? And if there's any signs of hope, that's also a thing that we get from visitors to the Peace Center. That what can the visitors actually do about this, and not just from a regulatory perspective?
I can give hopeful things after him too.
Oh, good.
I want to live in a positive
hopefully we
note.
don't leave people too discouraged. No, so what we do is we research. Obviously, we have to do our own research because we cannot trust. Sadly, we cannot trust what we're hearing from the tech companies. They will show something very one-sided. So we research. We build coalitions, international coalitions. So on all our work we do here in Norway, we share it with groups similar to us in Europe and in the United States in particular, because that's where we have good networks. And so when we publish something, we make a big splash, try to do that globally. And that's led to a few good changes. So back a few years ago, we exposed how an internet-connected doll aimed at children, was super insecure, was leaking data to lots of third parties, and basically was a big threat to children's security and safety and privacy. We managed to get that off the shelves in Europe. And in Berlin, maybe you might be going there soon, go to the Spy Museum and you'll see this doll Kayla like in the Spy Museum as a spy artifact, right?
Ooh.
And that's prompted, the good news is also that story prompted the European Union to start legislating security for our connected devices. And that's coming out now. And they're referencing this work as a result, as the reason why they enacted this. And I think also the work on dark patterns that we've done, we expose how Facebook are using dark patterns, how Google are using dark patterns, and also these lawsuits that we're doing expose also, this takes such a long time that by the time we get like a firm decision, the harm has already been done. And the business practices have become entrenched with us and we've gotten used to it, so the boiling frog problem. So maybe we need to ban certain practices like dark patterns. So I definitely think there's hope out there, and there's quite a few things you can also do at the individual level, I think.
So people often forget that we have gone through these phases of kind of disruption every time a new communication technology is invented, right? We learned about journalism. We understood the value of journalism when yellow journalism ran amok. We literally had wars because of badly run newspapers, right? We've gone through this process with TV, with radio. We have done this before. This is not, it feels new for us because it is new. It's the first time in our generation. But this is not a thing that humans have never done before. The second thing is, the thing that has changed is that we have realized we don't have to accept the way things are right now. That up until now, we had to accept Facebook's framing of the problem because we never got to see behind the curtain. We now know how many options they know that don't involve censorship. When you hear censorship, I want you to think linguistic equity. That when we design products for safety, when we start from a perspective of dignity and autonomy and safety, we can make products that work for all the countries in Africa, for Southeast Asia, places where people don't get to leave Facebook. Facebook went into those countries and killed the open internet. They paid people, they said, hey, we'll pay for your data if you use Facebook. If you want to use the open internet, you have to pay for it yourself. And so for the majority of languages in the world, 80 to 90% of the content available on the internet is only on Facebook. We must focus on linguistic equity if we want to care about the billion people who don't get a choice to leave. And that's how we'll protect stability and democracy around the world. We can do it. We've done it before. We have tools, and we just need to use them.
Okay, I see many hands.
Shall we collect a few questions, maybe?
One more question.
One more question. He has a mic.
Yeah.
Hi, Sten.
Is this on? Yeah, it's on.
Yeah.
I'm the guy with the mic, so I get
You're
to
like,
ask
I get the last question.
My name is Sten Stensen. I'm a journalism professor at Oslo Metropolitan University. And first of all, I would just like to say thank you, Frances Haugen, for what you've done. It's very courageous and risky, and I hope that you get all the support that you need. My question is, I would love to hear your thoughts on some of the initiatives that Facebook has taken in order to at least appear more socially responsible, like, for instance, the third-party fact-checking partnership and the oversight board. How do you evaluate those initiatives? Do you see them as actually doing good and steps in the right direction, or do you see them as superficial, insignificant image repair initiatives?
A recurrent thing I've been talking about since I first came out was I believe we got here because not enough people were sitting at the table. Like, not enough people were informed on like what choices existed. We don't have, there's probably 300 or 400 people in the entire world who understand all the ways these algorithms work together and the feedback loops with the features. Like, there weren't enough people at the table to adequately weigh in on trade-offs. The oversight board and the current manifestation of the third-party fact-checking program, because they were designed by Facebook, they were framed by Facebook, like they tried to do they tried to be good. But because they got to design the parameters, I think they're actively harmful, right? Because if they don't have to disclose which countries, they should have to put out a report every week saying we did this number of fact checks, this is which languages they were in and which geographies they targeted, right? Why isn't that part of that program? If we care about linguistic equity and safety for the whole world, we have to have that. Because things that are theatrical, that are distractions, keep us from having the conversations we need to have. The oversight board is in pain right now because they know they need to be having conversations about, like, these censorship systems. Which languages do they even support? Are they equally effective in all languages? Like, Facebook's own documents say that in Arabic, for large chunks of Arabic speakers, 75% of counterterrorism content gets labeled as terrorism content and taken down. But the oversight board doesn't get to look at that. They only know about it because I brought it forward. And why is it that they don't get to ask those questions? Why can't they demand that data? It's because Facebook wrote the rules for what they were allowed to do. And what they said you're allowed to do is, we know people freak out about censorship, and we want them to continue freaking out about censorship. Because when they focus on censorship, they don't ask, why is it we're not cutting the reshare chains at 2? Why aren't you requiring someone to click a link before you reshare it? Why aren't we talking about systems that are safe for the most vulnerable people in the world, that have linguistic equity? Why aren't we talking about that? Oh, no, because people freak out when you take their content down, and Facebook knows it. So I get very frustrated about those two things particularly. But thank you for asking about them.
Okay, we have to end this talk right now, even though we could continue for a long time. But I know you have
a tiny sliver. So my main point there, and I want to end on a happy note, is this illustrates why each of you in this room is so important right now, which is we can either choose to let Facebook frame the future, frame the path forward, or we can reclaim our agency to say, no, we demand a seat at the table. That these systems are the telecommunication systems of the world. For 1 billion people, at least, maybe 2, they don't get to opt out, and therefore they have to get to sit at the table because it is shaping their societies, it is shaping their perception of reality. But that's what, we get that choice. Now that you know, you are part of the solution. Because we can frame the discussion. We don't have to let Facebook frame it anymore. So.
Okay, that was nice way to end it, and we all have a message on what to do. So I would like to thank you for coming here today, and all of you for asking questions. So have a good day.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Oh, well done.
Thank you. Thank you also. Thank you to Bente Kalsnes, Finn Lützoholm, Myrstad, and Frances Haugen. And everyone here, we're opening the museum in 90 minutes to let everyone see the important work of Murato and Ressa. And all of you here have a 50% discount to come and visit the museum in the next 2 weeks. So hope to see you here. But now I must ask you to leave soon because we have hordes of people waiting outside. All right, thank you.